What's up, guys? Welcome back to this episode of the Road to Redemption podcast. I'm, as always, your host, Cam Williamson, and today we're talking about generational trauma, or what I call invisible trauma. Why do I call it invisible trauma? It's trauma we didn't experience, right? It's trauma that we all know. We're going to talk about what we do know, and then we're going to talk about what's not commonly talked about with generational trauma, and as always, how to overcome it. Guys, make sure you give us a thumbs up, please. Guys, give me 15 thumbs up. I've never gotten 15 thumbs ups. Give me 15 before the next episode goes live. I need 15 thumbs up before we put up another video, right? Generational trauma is... So it's a popular topic of conversation in today's day and age, slavery. If your great-great-grandparents were enslaved and you have strong feelings about racism and you get extreme anxiety in certain situations that would reflect someone that went through slavery, almost like PTSD type symptoms, it's because it's passed down through your gene pool, right? If your mother experienced domestic violence, you could have serious reactions to people raising their voice. That could be extremely anxiety causing for you. When you listen to people in their daily mental health battles and they say things like, I've been this way as long as I can remember. I've never not felt this way. I've always been down on myself, the type of person who has to belittle myself. I stay shut in. I don't really go out and I don't really explore. You know, that my mother was like that, my father was, and you look at things and you go, oh, this is the way I was not only brought up, and a lot of things in our upbringing aren't necessarily spoken about, right? Because they're considered normal to us. It's not until you grow up and you become an adult of your own and you really start to build your own house, I'll say, not literally, but you have a family and you set your own rules, right? That was the big thing that our parents always used to say, my house, my rules. Well, when you get your own house, it's your rules. So you have to actually have conversations if you're going to be smart and you're going to raise a healthy family. Like, hey, how are we going to speak to each other, right? When you get married, that was a very important thing that my wife and I did. Hey, what is off the table for us? When we're in arguments or something in the future, name calling is not something we do. Going to bed with stuff unresolved. Now, that doesn't mean we have to be lovey-dovey, kissing and hugging, but going to bed with stuff unresolved, not going to happen. We can agree to disagree, but we're not going to go to bed with some issue that is going to carry into a weird tomorrow for anyone. Why is that? Because when you do things like that and you carry resentment and you build anger, that all seeps into who you are as a person. Your kids later on in life will feel things around what was going on at the time. Sorry, my dog's going nuts off camera. Stop. You'll get feelings towards certain types of people or even certain people that may be around that you don't even know why you feel a type of way about them. I understand that not everyone has the privilege to talk to their parents or, it's not even just your parents. It's your grandparents. It's your great-great-grandparents. It's anybody that came into contact with the people who made you in any, facet of your lineage. So, and then what did they go through? There's so many studies done about ancestors of survivors of the Holocaust, and it shows that they have extreme anxiety from very young ages because it's just built into their DNA, that stress, that traumatic event, right? I understand that a lot of us don't have the ability, and we're just now coming into a time where it's even normal to talk about how we feel, and that's a new age way of thinking. Older people don't necessarily share that all the time. So if you try to talk to our grandparents and our great-grandparents about abuses, especially things from when they were young, one, they may not have the clearest memory of it, but also, two, it's something that while I don't, subscribe to AA and recovery and stuff like that, it's one thing I took while I was took from it while I was in it is you don't have the right, because of your own searching, because of your own journey, you don't have the right to reach back into someone else's past and drag them back there, right? Because you don't know the kind of damage you could do to them. You don't know the kind of turmoil or emotional hell that you could bring them by trying to rehash a traumatic experience because you're trying. Now, I'm not saying you're not warranted in your answers being, or, your questions being answered, but you have to tread lightly and you have to be respectful, because when you go and you try to talk to your grandfather about his experience in Vietnam, well, he may not ever have spoken about that. Most of them didn't. If you tried to talk to your great-great-grandmother about what it was like to be in a concentration camp, well, she might struggle to tell you that. And, when people go through traumatic stuff, like we had people in my family that when they came around, you go, oh, hey, we don't bring that up. We don't talk about that. And it's just normal, right? One thing I want to share with you, and this is the best way that I can apply it and how to overcome it. If you've listened to this show for any amount of time and, you've listened to me, you know that hypochondria or physical anxiety is a big thing for me. I've always been a catastrophe type thinker where I always think I'm going to fall ill with a deadly illness at a young age, and it's this catastrophe type thinking that's loomed over my life and has also caused me to make very impulsive decisions pretty much all my life. And it's been tough to balance substances. Everyone knows my battle that I had with alcohol and, stuff like that, and even nicotine, caffeine, just all kinds of stuff. And I look, and I had to observe my parents and my grandparents, and I looked, and I was like, well, what do I have in common with these people, right? I drank, and I always got in trouble. Now, no one in my family ever drank and got in trouble, but they all drank a lot. But they all kept it, at least under control enough to where they weren't constantly in and out of jail for it. But my family has a problem generationally with alcohol. It's not something that any really of the men in my family handle well, or, it's not something that our family doesn't teeter a balancing act on substances very well. It's either all or nothing kind of thing for us. And my grandfather, was in the war, was in the Gulf War, I should say. He was a very high-strung man. He was a very, and I love him dearly. Will always be one of my favorite people that ever graced this earth. But he was a very harsh man. He was a very rough man. And my father was a very rough, kind of assertive. His dominance by, a loud booming voice and a leather belt a lot of times. So when you see those actions, and I grew up one of the only men in a family full of women. I had one male uncle and my grandfather. And then me. And it wasn't until I had a little cousin years later that we had another male that was constantly around my immediate family. It was a lot of women coming up. So I saw early the conversations that happened when my grandfather would leave, how he would hurt people's feelings when he would explode and have a male's type temper, when he would come home and, dinner wasn't done right, or things were a little more chaotic than his day, would have liked it to have been when he got home. Everyone was going to feel that wrath. And I knew, and my father was not that way, but my father was, if you did anything outside the lines of what he deemed acceptable, then you dealt with that. And it was something that I always observed, and I went, my family has explosive tempers. So therefore, I have an explosive temper. And I was raised almost as, I'm an Italian-Irish guy who, we're loud, this bravado of kind of vulgar, over the top sometimes. And I played into that my whole life. but it was always very natural for me. Like I always felt like this isn't me putting on some kind of act. This is really who I am. I see my father, my grandfather being this way, and this is just naturally how I feel. Well, this is who I'm becoming. And not knowing until you look at how that's going to affect your life and the outcomes in it and how your relationships will end out, you're going to realize that not dealing or not even acknowledging the traumas that your first line relatives, second line relatives being your parents, your grandparents, third line being your great grandparents, by not acknowledging the flaws that they made in their life and taking the lessons that they're willing to give you if they're so inclined to do so. My father is good for telling me, like, hey man, don't do this kind of stuff that I did when I was young. And my grandfather was always the type, do as I say, never as I do. Like, to talk out of context, or to be wild with my mother, my grandmother, one of my aunts when I was young, not going to happen. You would get smacked upside your head so fast, especially for disrespecting your mother or my grandmother. You really would not have a reason to disrespect your aunts, but you would get slapped so fast. But all of a sudden, when the problem was his to have, everybody's fair game. It doesn't matter. So in my first marriage, I didn't consciously think of it this way, but it was always a situation where my, step kid at the time was never allowed to speak to my wife at the time any certain type of way, because that was my way to enforce my dominance and my alphadom over the house. Is you got to be out of your mind talking to your mother like that. When really I didn't care. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't about the values that you should be teaching. It was the loudness and the bravado and the things that I saw and that were just natural to the men in my life coming through. I realized that as a problem, as something that I saw, something that I experienced. And then when I looked at that whole thing as an actual experience and go, well, why is it that when confrontation strikes, I want to immediately fight all the time? It's like, well, because for years of my life, I wasn't able to defend myself. I had people screaming at me, hitting me with belts, things like that, for things that I didn't understand, right? A kid can understand that they've done something wrong, but most kids don't understand why things are wrong. And one of the huge conversations that we're having in the world today is like the conversation of, is it effective to physically discipline your kids, spank them, that kind of stuff, swat them on the ass? I have to say no, right? I am a kid who got swatted with a belt, hands, brooms, all kinds of shit. All kinds of stuff. I got whacked over the head with a handful of spoons for telling my grandmother I wasn't feeling doing the dishes one time. My grandfather just grabbed it. My grandfather would never be caught dead doing a dish. Never. No, never. Never. Fucking never. And he tells me, I was living with my grandparents at the time, and I'll never forget this. I tell this story quite often. My grandfather, rest his soul, was standing. I don't know how it happened, because even for my grandfather to be in the kitchen is not something that would have happened often unless, again, his plates were made for him and brought to him. Unless he was really had a wild hair up his ass and wanted something bad enough, there was really no reason for him to be in the kitchen unless he was passing through. So I'm in there doing whatever I'm doing. My grandmother's in there probably preparing a meal, doing dishes, cleaning 6 other things. My grandmother's amazing. My grandfather, passing through the kitchen, goes, Cam boy, get up and help your grandmother with the dishes. I get up, whatever. I know better than to say no or to whatever, but I made some sort of noise. He didn't acknowledge it. I get over and I start doing the thing. He wasn't really, attitude wasn't really a thing because he just didn't acknowledge that. As long as you did what you were told to do and you weren't being super disrespectful, he's not going to come undone like that. So then I start doing the dishes, and I'm doing it real shitty, right? I'm doing it shitty on purpose so that way they don't want me to do it, because I know that's what my grandmother will do. She'll watch me doing it. She'll get frustrated at the way I'm doing it and go, Cam, just get the fuck out of here. Get out of here. So I did something. He goes, Cam, wash those damn dishes and do it right. And I was like, man. And I did it again. I was like, oh. This time, he reached down. We didn't have a dishwasher, back in the day. It was just two sides of the sink and you had a dryer. Well, my grandmother had already done a whole load of dishes that was drying in the rack. He reaches over, and thank God, there was a handful, like a whole thing full of spoons. He grabbed them shits by the stem and went, quack, and just hit me. Wham! Right on top of my head. Whack! With like the underside of the spoon. The spoon curls like that. He hit me with a bang! And I mean, it was probably, I don't know, 10 to 12 spoons. Whack! Right on top of my head. And I was like, it was the first time that I was legitimately like, yo, this motherfucker just hit me. Like, what the hell just happened? And I remember in that moment thinking, like, he wasn't mad at me, right? He wasn't angry with me. He wasn't disappointed in me. He was acting the same way he saw people acting when he was coming up. I told you to do this. You gave me the reaction that I just was not trying to hear. Kokwaka! Never an apology for an explosion around really ever. And those are all things too. Like not being apologized to. Not having someone to tell you, hey, this is not okay. The way that just went down is not the way people are supposed to act. How are you feeling? Is there anything you would like to talk about with what just happened? And how can we both, on all sides, make sure that we do better so that doesn't happen again? So that way I don't have to hit you hard to the point where I'm, traumatizing you. Now, getting hit with spoons is not traumatic, but having someone you love intentionally try to hurt you, whether it's a rash thing by them or not, that does something to a person, a kid. So what does that mean for my kids? It means whether I ever hit, I don't believe in spanking my kids because of the way I was raised, but without ever laying a hand on them, if I was to ever get loud, they may be already absolutely terrified because of just the way that our DNA goes. You don't realize the decisions you make and the things that go on around you, they really do affect you in your life. And they affect you and are deeply, deeply ingrained as to who we are as people. And I think that's where Sam Harris's conversations about determinism versus free will are very interesting, because Sam Harris talks about you don't really have free will due to your genetic wiring, your heredity, your DNA, the things that happen to the people in your lineage. You respond to things specific ways. I was just talking to my wife about it last night. I don't like that. I don't like to subscribe to that type of thinking, because to me that pulls responsibility away from the person who's living the life. At every moment we have a choice to make, but you only have the choice to make when you've got options. If you only know one way of thinking and you're just constantly reacting off emotion, thought leads to emotion, leads to action, and you're not having any type of buffer space in between there, well, you're just copying patterns from not only your life, but from patterns from other people's lives that you don't even know. So that's the episode for today, guys. Make sure you give us a thumbs up, please. Guys, give me 15 thumbs up. I've never gotten 15 thumbs ups. Give me 15 before the next episode goes live. I need 15 thumbs up before we put up another video, right? Hit it. Hit the subscribe button so that way you get notified of anything we got coming, all the skateboarding videos, the Road to Redemption podcast, which you currently just watched, and anything else I drum up. We're going to bring back the cooking show soon, Ready to Rise. That's going to be fun. I've been eating a lot of good Italian food lately. Yeah, it's going to be good, guys. Tune in. If you want merch like this, head over to the Road, the number 2, redemptionpodcast.com. We love you so much. We'll see you later.